Welcome back, everybody. We are now moving on from our preliminary exercises on Project 1, the line project, to the formal design project. That's our second step. So just to give you a quick overview, I wanted you to be able to see again the full layout of this 18 by 24 page. We've divided it into 3 vertical columns and 1, 2, 3, 4 horizontal rows. So there's 12 individual boxes. They are 4 inches in height and 5 inches in width. So just as a reminder how we've arrived at that. Notice, zoom in here. That I've marked along the left-hand edge 1 inch from the top to provide a 1 inch margin at the top edge. I can slide the ruler down. You can see I've now marked it here for the 4 inch height of my first horizontal row. Again, marked it off for a 1 inch margin between the top row and the next. And sliding the ruler down, I've arrived at 4 inches here for the height of this next row. 1 inch gap in between. Another 4 inch height here. From here to here is your 4 inches. Another 1 inch gap. And again, a 4 inch height. Notice that to the end of my paper, because it's 24 inches long, I have a 4 inch space here at the end. So I've marked off those units on the left-hand margin and over here on the right-hand margin. So 1 inch plus 4 is 5. 1 inch is 6, another 4 is 10, 1 inch brings us to 11, another 4 is 15, 1 inch brings us to 16, another 4 brings us to 20, and that leaves us with 24 at the end. So again, 1 inch plus 4 height brings us to 5. 1 inch gap there brings us to 6, 4 inch height brings us to 10, a 1 inch gap brings us to 11, 4 inch height brings us to 15, 1 inch gap brings us to 16, 4 inch height brings us to 20, and then the end of my paper is just past your screen right now here at 24. So depending on how you want to mark it, you can see that I'm just laying that ruler across and marking those horizontal lines. For these divisions, we're going to have just a 1/2 inch margin here at the left and right sides, then 5 inches for the box, 1 inch gap between, 5 inch width for the box, 1 inch gap in between, a 5 inch box, and that'll bring us to our 1/2 inch left over here for the margin on this side. You can see here that I'm marking this at the 1/2 inch spot, then at the 5, one inch, 5, 1 inch again. That third 5 inch box you see ends here, and I have a 1/2 inch margin there at the end. I could also do it this way, if you prefer your math like this. I've marked it at the 1/2 inch, plus 5 brings us to 5.5, plus 1 to 6.5, plus 5 brings us to 11.5, plus 1 to 12.5, plus 5 to 17.5, leaving us with 18 at the end of the page. And again, I'm lining up those marks vertically, and that's going to divide these into my individual 12 box units. So, as you know, you were looking to make symmetrical designs on our top row. This is geometric design, only geometric lines, just straight mechanical looking lines with a focal point in the center. This one should be your organic symmetrical design, only natural looking lines. Again, focal point in the center. And again, the last one on the top row is a combination of organic and linear geometric marks with a focal point in the center and a symmetrical design. The other 9 designs are all asymmetrical. We're using the rule of thirds to locate our focal point, not quite in the center, but near the center and slightly to the left and high, or near the center, slightly left and low, near the center, slightly right and high, near the center, slightly right and low. And we do that by dividing the individual composition into 3 sections vertically and 3 sections horizontally. The first box here is going to be geometric with an asymmetrical design using the rule of thirds to locate my focal point. And that's going to continue all the way down. All of these 3 boxes below the geometric symmetrical design are my geometric designs that are asymmetrically balanced with a focal point placed via the rule of thirds. In the middle, underneath my organic symmetrical design, I'm going to have only organic lines, asymmetrical designs with my focal point located based on the rule of thirds, 3 of those, organic, asymmetrical, rule of thirds. And the last row underneath the combination, symmetrical with a central focal point, we're going to have 3 combinations using both geometric and organic lines, asymmetrical designs with a focal point based on the rule of thirds, 3 of those, combo asymmetrical, 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 rule of thirds. So you'll have a total of 12 designs. If I back up here, I can show you the designs I was working on before. So there's my top row, my symmetrical designs, geometric, organic, combination. And then below that, I have my 9 designs where the focal point is based on the rule of thirds. Here, here, here. So it should be pretty clear where I'm trying to direct your attention. These are the ones that I've done with just straight lines, geometric lines. This set is the set that's with only organic lines, and then this set is my combination. So what you're doing now that you have these 12 to choose from is decide which one you think is the most interesting, compelling, dynamic composition. And I'm actually personally kind of leaning toward this one. I like the fact that there is a focal point that's not dead center, that the design is not completely symmetrical. I kind of enjoy the contrast of some of the larger open spaces with areas that have more texture. I like the contrast of the high contrast of dark black with some open white. So I think this idea might be one that I could develop. There's other good things about other designs, but right now that's the one that I'm sort of leaning toward. So I'm going to switch over to my 9x12 piece of paper. You're going to be using Bristol board or drawing paper, depending on money and amount of supplies. So here is a 9x12 page. And I've given this a 1/2 inch margin on what is going to be the top and bottom. We're going to arrange these to be horizontal, landscape-oriented compositions. So I marked this at 1/2 inch from the top, 1/2 inch from the bottom, and I did that on both sides, and then connected those with vertical lines. I've also given myself here a 1 inch margin on the left and the right-hand side. 1 inch, 1 inch. So by connecting those lines properly, I've got a box to work in. And just for those of you who are looking to mathematically locate your rule of thirds, roughly speaking, if you divide across into 3 vertical columns, if you measure from the left over about 3 inches and 5/16 of an inch, measure in 3 inches and 5/16 here, you'll get roughly even columns. To divide it into 3 even horizontal rows, I marked these off at every 2 inches, 2 and 5/8. So just a little bit more than 2.5. 1, 2, 3, and they're really close to even. So when those lines intersect, you can see I have 4 possible locations for my main focal point. To make that more clear, I wanted to do this in light pencil and then ink in the borders so you could see it more clearly. And this is the focal point that I'm aiming for right here to replicate the basic idea of this design. So I would recommend working with pencil to start this off. I used a pretty ruler straight line to get some geometric lines aiming toward this focal point that I wanted to emphasize. And remember, we're shooting for using about 200 lines, give or take. I'm not going to count them, and I don't expect you to count them, but I do expect there to be a lot of lines in this design or in this layout. So I'm going to make my lines thicker here as they get toward the focal point and taper to a little bit thinner as they go away. Now, if you want, you could start filling these with pencil just to remind yourself that these are going to be thick and dark. I don't think I would use the marker until I was really certain of what I wanted to be filled in solidly. So you could start by using the pencil just to kind of get your idea going. And then once you become confident about it, you can move over to the pen and start making those lines more permanent. So the final piece is going to be in Sharpie or design marker or ink of some form. So you can see that I've fairly well replicated this original concept. Now I can start adding in some organic lines that seem to flow from this area or flow toward this area. Now we also want with this project to start playing with the illusion of three-dimensional space. So generally speaking, things that are darker in value appear to be closer to us. Things that are lighter in value appear to be further away from us. So I might want it to seem as though my focal point is like the peak of a mountain. And we're looking straight down in on it. And as it flows down the mountainside, we're getting lighter and lighter lines and marks. Or perhaps I could create the illusion that there's something closer to us here by using larger and darker lines and shapes. So maybe I want to use some more of my geometric, or rather organic lines to establish little bit of a sense of a foreground here. And perhaps lines cross over this and lead us toward that focal point by creating implied lines of sight that sort of aim toward that moment or toward that spot in the design. I probably want to make this bottom corner even darker, more solid, so it appears closer to us. I can make some of these lines taper from quite large near us, tapering as they start to imply that deep space toward our focal point. We want to also make sure that we're working in a way that doesn't create too much symmetry or too much repetition. We still want our design to feel asymmetrically balanced. We don't want it to feel like the focal point is slap in the middle and that it's equally weighted in terms of exact same shapes on either side of center. But we want to balance the amount of visual weight. So I've got a lot of dark over here. So by balancing it with some dark in this section, it brings asymmetrical balance. Left and right feel about equal to me right now in terms of how dark it is here and how dark it is here. So that's what we really mean by asymmetrical balance. It doesn't mean that it is designed along a center line with identical shapes on either side. It's that the visual weight, the texture, the movement is about equal on the left as it is on the right. So this is basically what you're going to do, is take your original idea and start evolving it into something more sophisticated. And once you have decided exactly what you want in your design, you can switch over to your design style markers or your Sharpies, and you can start filling these in to really make sure that everything that you want jet black is really nice and solidly black. We're shooting for about 200 lines altogether. And so remember, this one that I'm working on right now is really only one line. It's quite thick, and it starts to get thinner as it goes further away here to my right. But it still only counts as one because it does start quite thick and become thin as it moves off in space. So you can play all kinds of visual games with this illusion of space. You could also use broken lines. You could use lines that stop and start, that begin in one area, break off, and pick up elsewhere. The lines can cross one another. That's, of course, fine. And in this case, I chose a design in which I was combining both geometric straight lines and these organic lines. But I could even make some divisions here to make this even more interesting for myself. What if I fill in, instead of making this a big solid black line, what if I filled this section with several cross-hatched style geometric lines? That would really start to create a sense of three-dimensional space in this one. If I can make this appear to be one plane, and this section appear to be a plane that operates in a different way, that starts to create an illusion that there's a geometric solid form there. So now that starts to break that into two planes in space. Maybe I want to increase that game even more dramatically. Do that here. So you can see that I'm still using line as my primary tool. I'm still directing your attention to a focal point, but I'm now starting to play even more games with three-dimensional space. So this is how your design will start to evolve. You can be kind of playful with it. You can create a subjectively imaginary kind of world if you want to imagine that the space is three-dimensional. We're trying to use line to achieve a multitude of goals here. We're trying to achieve the goal of creating an asymmetrical design. We're trying to achieve a specifically chosen focal point that is not dead center, but is achieved through observation of the rule of thirds. In this particular case, I chose a design to work on that would allow me to play with both my geometric style lines and my organic lines. You might decide that your best design is strictly geometric or strictly organic. That's fine too. But what we're looking to do is to take your initial thoughts from the preliminary exercises and start to evolve that into something more complex. So again, I look forward to seeing what you come up with, what creative solutions you can come up with for this design challenge.